one more point of view on this week's Education Conversation.
The Dan York State of Mind program is brought to you in part by Lookout Rhode Island and Takeo Comfort Solutions.
Erika Sanzi writes the blog Good School Hunting. She's been an often guest, but not recently, so it's good to have her back to talk about some of the things that we've been talking about this week. Not necessarily the intricacies of the education funding formula, but money in the system, and then a conversation about how you get an A, or why you shouldn't. Welcome in. Nice to have you aboard. Thanks very much for tuning in on this busy Thursday. Donald Trump may have met his rhetorical match. I don't know how this election, this primary season is going to come out, but Mike Bloomberg isn't taking any nonsense and wisely focusing on Donald Trump rather than the rest of the Democratic field that he's trying to blow up with all of his money. Headline here reflects the back and forth like two children, but since we've already acquiesced the idea that our president is one, I guess Mr. Bloomberg is going to join the fracas. Trump belittling his height, which of course is very mature, and something that Mike Bloomberg can do everything about, right? But Bloomberg has responded by suggesting that the president is nothing but a carnival barker. Not the first time that's been said, but is suggesting that even his supporters laugh behind his back. That is something that has long been kind of felt but never articulated in battle. So this is a precursor to what could be one interesting 2020, no doubt. In the meantime, on a very serious note, we have a Justice Department that seems to be, well, doing some provocative stuff. Headlines like this talk about the worry that long-time career law enforcement types have with the Justice Department. Here's the network.
They treated Roger Stone very badly. They treated everybody very badly.
In the Oval Office, the president continued to lash out at Roger Stone's prosecutors.
It's a disgrace, and frankly, they ought to apologize to a lot of the people whose lives they've ruined.
In November, a jury found Stone guilty of 7 counts of witness tampering, lying to Congress, and obstruction. The president's comments and his attack on the judge overseeing the case drew rare rebuke from Republicans.
I think this is a situation where the tweet was very problematic.
I don't think the president should have tweeted about an ongoing case.
But they also said they're not concerned about the Department of Justice being independent.
I have a lot of confidence that they got it right here.
The president praised Attorney General William Barr for intervening in the case. But Barr claims he did not coordinate with the White House when he overruled the prosecutors and sought a lighter sentence.
Attorney General William Barr ought to be ashamed and embarrassed.
Barr's actions have prompted a flood of criticism from Democrats and former Justice Department leaders.
For the department to have cast its lot firmly in this way is abysmal.
Barr has repeatedly been accused of working too closely with the president, including when he characterized the findings of the Mueller report before it had been released.
I'm going to make the decisions based on the law and the facts.
Barr dismissed the criticism in an interview with CBS News in May.
I think it just goes with the territory of being Attorney General in a hyper-partisan period of time.
Here's what also goes with the territory. When the president tries to involve himself via social media, tweeting or otherwise, you've got to make some kind of public statement about it, in concert with what is a revised Justice Department proffer to the judge for what the sentence ought to be for Roger Stone. 4, not 1, 4 prosecutors stepped away, 3 from the case, 1 from his job over all of this. This story's not done. Of course, there's no gas in the tank in this country for oversight. Can you imagine if Democrats start talking about an impeachment inquiry over something like this? Not going to be done. The impeachment inquiry transfers to your temperament for this president in November. And that's all that's going to happen here. In the meantime, let's talk about what's happening at home. The convention center story, the grand jury continues, and Eyewitness News picked up on the pace of testimony yesterday.
Grand jury proceedings are secret, and often the public doesn't know what they're looking into, but today we saw 2 people connected to the controversial audit coming and going from the courthouse. Auditor General Dennis Hoyle leaving after appearing before a statewide grand jury at Kent County Courthouse in Warwick. Hoyle testifying in an ongoing investigation into an audit of the convention center ordered by House Speaker Nicholas Mattiello. Hoyle works for the General Assembly and was ordered by Mattiello to conduct the audit. That order canceled after Target 12 revealed the action came at the same time as Mattiello's friend, Convention Center Director of Security James Demers, was the focus of a personnel investigation. Mattiello has repeatedly denied the audit was retaliation. Also testifying on Wednesday, Convention Center General Manager Larry Lepore, who was in the grand jury room for hours.
Good morning, Mr. Lepore. How are you? Any comment before you go in? Not at all.
Neither Lepore nor Hoyle would comment afterwards. On Monday, Convention Center Authority Board member Paul McDonald was called in, as was Authority Executive Director Jim McCarville, telling Target 12 afterward he was questioned about the timeline of the audit. Two members of Speaker Mattiello's inner circle, his chief of staff Leo Skenyon and a top aide Frank Montanaro, were also subpoenaed to testify, but we did not see them at court today.
Caught later yesterday afternoon by reporters, the Speaker of the House said that this grand jury investigation, quote, it's a process I have nothing to do with, and expressed his level of confidence in his leadership and the way things are going at the State House. Mr. Speaker, you would want to be called to the grand jury. You would want to be, because those who are not called to the grand jury are called targets. Speaker's a target of this investigation. In fact, the exclusive target of this investigation. I don't think he doesn't know that, by the way. All right. So, the other night here on this State of Mind, the executive director of the Charter School Organization and the School Committee Association had a good rat-a-tat-tat on the constitutional right for a kid's education and a proposed funding system that penalizes schools, charter schools, that are underperforming.
What they're saying is if a kid goes to a charter school that is underperforming, as undefined underperforming, then they may get up to 50% less than a kid that would go to a district school. That's disparate treatment. What you're saying is this kid's going to get less towards his public education than a peer that go to a district school would get. That's disparate treatment. And that disparate treatment would, in our view, violate their equal protection rights under the Constitution. That's what makes it unconstitutional. Because
yeah, I do disagree. Because education is not a constitutional right.
In Rhode Island.
No, in the United States it's not.
Sure,
no, it isn't. No, it isn't. You didn't read San Antonio versus Rodriguez.
Well, we have a litigation going on right now.
It is a right to access public education.
Tim, do you support this litigation on the constitutional right for a child to have an education?
I support it to the extent we haven't filed an amicus brief, but I understand it. It's around the constitutional issue that Thurgood Marshall articulated in Rodriguez, San Antonio versus Rodriguez. You're going to read that, Keith.
We're talking about access.
And so there's been a lot of reaction. We had a lieutenant governor here the other night, actually last night, to talk about this a little bit. And Erika Sanzi, who I rely on for good thinking on education, wrote this blog in reaction to the show that talked about the money in the schools. So let's talk about the money in the schools. How are you?
I'm great. It's good to see you.
Thanks
I haven't seen you since the beard, all this, the new svelte look.
What was your take
on that conversation?
Yes.
So I found the conversation frustrating because, as with most conversations around education, they're not student-centered. They're talking about money, right? They're talking about fidelity to a system and money that belongs in a system that Tim Duffy has always believed is entitled to the dollars of the children who live in whatever zip code they live in. So I think that the charter school proposals that came out of the task force are terrible and wrong and, unjust. And I also think that what Tim Duffy is talking about, he's talking as if kids are widgets, right? Interchangeable, money attaches to them. And so the whole conversation is basically about, when we lose these kids, we lose these dollars, and there's zero conversation about children getting what they need.
All right, when we come back, once again, we'll give you the mechanics of the Follow the Child school funding formula as it exists now, what the change might be, and then we'll talk about getting a good grade. Stay with us.
Now is that the money follows the child, right? The state money we're talking about. And those dollars are determined by student counts, the number of students you have in your district, the type of students you have, the low income, free and reduced lunch. There's a whole bunch of variables.
Special needs.
Special needs to a degree, I don't think as much as what we requested back in 2009.
That's Lieutenant Governor Dan McKee, who weighed in on this potential change in the little battle that we had earlier this week. Remember, McKee is one of the pioneers of the mayoral charter school academies, which are not part of the state charter school association that has more than a dozen schools in it that Mr. Oliveira, who you saw previously,
but they would
runs.
be impacted by these proposals.
Without a doubt.
Yeah.
So the proposal, in essence, says if a charter school is underperforming the sending district, children going to the charter school, then they can be cut by as much as 50% on the rate per child that they receive. Mr. Oliveira's point, I think, is well made, which is, well, why don't you just proclaim slow death? If a school is underperforming and you cut it by half of its rate, resources will inevitably dry up, and how does performance increase? I don't know how that happens. I think it's part of an agenda that Senator Pearson, one of the authors of the reform, has, which is to end charter schools. And he has been invited, and I hope he comes next week to talk to us about this. You see it the same way?
Senator Pearson was a supporter of charter schools, early in his career, and he has since flip-flopped, largely because, he wants the union support, and he thinks that this will help him with his aspirations. Another person who's never child-centered. Okay, so according to this proposal...
You're saying somebody who's rewriting education funding formulas who, quote, is never child-centered. That's...
Okay,
that rolls off your tongue.
I want to reword it.
I'm not checking you off on it. I just want to make sure I heard it correctly.
I'm going to reword it. So he's somebody I've been familiar with for quite a long time because we're from the same place. And he cares about dollars and cents. That's what he cares about. He doesn't ever talk about, the benefits of a child being in the right place, for their mental health, for their emotional health, just because it's the right place for them. To give you an example, there is one charter school in the state of Rhode Island that is designed to serve pregnant and parenting teens, okay?
Underperforms against the standards.
And it may underperform as compared to some of the districts that these girls, and sometimes boys, have exited. That means that a pregnant teenager in the state of Rhode Island wouldn't be able to go to the only school designed for pregnant teenagers if the sending district happened to have higher scores. And oh, by the way, higher performing for whom? Senator Pearson, and this is why I'm going to say, right? Senator Pearson doesn't talk about data broken into subgroups. He always insists on the aggregate because that's how he can claim, for example, that Cumberland is higher performing than Blackstone Valley Prep. But if you look at subgroup data, Cumberland is not higher performing with all groups of students. So when you ask him about, in my case, when I've asked him about that, he's blocked me on Twitter and invited me to his office to talk about it. Well, he won't answer the question.
Well, go to his office.
Well, this was a few years ago when that would have required a babysitter, and I wasn't paying a babysitter to go talk to Ryan Pearson about disaggregated data that everybody can see for themselves. So.
Sounds like a battle of methods than trying to win the conversation.
It may be, but it's just
smaller than I expect from you.
No. Well, I mean, I guess I could see that, but it's utter dishonesty. You think that a person should have to go during their workday to the office that is open never to meet with somebody to simply get them to admit, oh, you're right, actually, when we break the data out, it does look different.
So maybe you're suggesting to me that the debate that you were having on social media couldn't be won, and this was a way for him to deflect, is what you're saying, maybe. But the point here is...
Maybe, but it's not a question of winning. It's just a question of the truth.
Okay. At the end of the day, often used cliche phrase, do we need reform?
What do you mean?
Of the funding formula?
Oh, it's not perfect. I absolutely think you have to revisit it after 10 years. No, 100%.
And I do think that the sending districts have some legitimate claim to say, hey, can we review this? Because if you're spending $10,000 or $12,000 per pupil, and you have an exodus out of your system to a charter school, it affects the balance sheet.
That's true.
The dirty little secret that the school systems, though, are not talking about is that there are vast amounts of empty chairs right now, not only for charter migration, but with the birth rate cycles. And it seems like we're overstocked with teachers. And that's something that the unions just do not want to talk about. They just have no interest in it. So that's got to come up. If you're going to talk about funding formulas in general, I think you probably have to address that too, right?
Well, I think people just need to get honest about the fact that, you know, they have other ways of bringing in revenue that they choose not to exercise. And I also think you need to get honest about, you know, what is it about our product that people are leaving? And in the case of Cumberland, one of the most improved districts, I mean, their performance has shot up, essentially, you know, at the same time that there was competition. So I do believe that Cumberland has an argument to be made about needing more funding, but don't tell me that their performance has suffered.
Well, I think that is their self-induced catch-22.
And I say that as a mother with a child in a district school in Cumberland.
Right, and at a charter.
And my youngest at Blackstone Valley Prep.
And a former teacher, and a former school board member in Cumberland, no doubt. I think what's really fascinating, though, is that you know, Dan McKee was blamed for eroding the Cumberland school system with this idea of a charter school, and with his Office of Children and Learning, you know, under his mayoral auspice. And look what's happened over a decade. Cumberland is the fastest rising district on the JV, because all of Rhode Island is the junior varsity compared to Massachusetts.
But that goes to what I'm saying. That all of that critique of Dan McKee came from a sense of entitlement. They believed that they were entitled to educate all of the kids living in their district. So the little ones in the OCYL, they didn't want that. By the way, my kids also attended that, and it was a great program. And then they don't want students access. It's like they feel entitled to every child that lives within that zip code.
Well, it's part of the business.
Well, then admit that it's a business.
Of course it's a business. Of course it's a business.
But are the people going to come on and say, she's right, we're actually not having student-centered conversations, we are talking about money. We are talking about the dollars and cents that attach to each child, regardless of that child's needs.
That's like a hospital saying that it's all about the patient, when we all know, in large part, it's all about the money. Sure, the patient matters, but you got to have the money to fix the patient, and so it's this circular.
The patient matter should be the center of the conversation, and like Angelica Infante Green has said, the conversations need to be student-centered. And they're not.
You know what you ought to do?
What?
You ought to write another column that talks about the definition of student-centered.
Okay.
When we come back,
I'll add it to my schedule.
Yes. No, I'm just
to my list.
because
Actually,
you use
I
that
don't
term
make
a lot,
lists.
and I think people get what you mean, but sophisticated analysis and definition of what that really means and what it doesn't mean would be an interesting
Well, do
read.
people need examples? I mean, are examples helpful?
Do you want to give me one real quick?
Sure. I think of the kid who's relentlessly bullied in school, right? Like that school is miserable for them. It's torture for them. And they find a place where they fit in and that works for them that is outside their district. You're going to tell me that kid shouldn't be able to go to that school where he fits in and feels cared for and his mental health is now back on track because the district that he left has higher test scores? And give me a break.
Got it? There's your example. When should you get an A? Next. And so I suggest you read Erika Sanzi on her Good School Hunting blog. She's moonlighting the Valley Breeze this month, so that's very nice. I consider that to be the Bible of Northern Rhode Island. So.
And the East Bay Times, actually. The column's running in all the papers.
Nice.
Because I'm guest writing for Arlene Violet. She's away.
The headline is, I never got an A, and I'm better for it. We only have a few minutes, but tell the story.
Well, I just have been thinking a lot as a mom and just watching, you know, grades that go out, and it seems to me that expectations are often not high enough, and that that it's easy to get really high grades, even when the product you turn in isn't that great. And so a report recently came out from the Thomas B. Fordham Institute, which is a think tank in D.C., and I do a little bit of work for them. And it now is it's a study that shows that students benefit from tougher graders. And it's not just white students, or it's not just urban students. All students, urban, rural, suburban, all students, black, white, brown, they all benefit from tougher graders and higher expectations. And those benefits, like that hard teacher that you have, you're still benefiting from that 2 years after. So I was just thinking about my English classes in high school, which were very challenging. I was in honors English through high school, and I worked so hard, and when I got back a B- or a B, I was happy. I was proud. It was the way it should be, and I knew I could still get an A, and I never got an A on a high school English paper in an honors English class. But I think that I'm better for that, and what we see now is we see grade inflation is pervasive, right? So you see grades and GPAs are soaring, but objective measures testing is flat or declining. And so there's a disconnect there.
Well, we've all experienced that, right? For most of us who've been through school, either 12 or 16 or more grades, we were always trying to, who's got the easy A, who's the tougher A, who's the, da-da-da-da-da. Metrics are different based on subject matter, I know, but even across common subject matter, metrics would be different. There doesn't seem to ever be a count-on consistency about that evaluation. We've all experienced that, right?
Yes.
But you think it's getting easier?
Well, the self-esteem movement that really sort of started in the 80s and just we became like, all of us knew about the self-esteem movement by the 90s, which was that the thought was, we're not doing well, all of our metrics are bad academically, etc. So I know what will work. If we just overpraise kids, if we compliment them, if we boost their self-esteem, if we make them feel better about themselves, they'll do better. And the opposite has happened because their antenna goes up and they say, this person has low expectations of me. They don't think that I can do it. And so they hear empty praise when they produce nothing. And that has really hurt kids.
Meaning you're not fooling the kid.
You're not fooling the kid. You're not fooling the kid. They know. And at a time now where we sometimes, I think, I write in the piece about how, with all the conversations around equity, it can get twisted into this idea of it's not fair to hold students with difficult, sort of out-of-school burdens that they carry. It's not fair to hold them to high standards, and it turns out that actually you have to do that for them if you want to serve them well. To lower the expectation and grade them easily will hurt them in the long run.
And then again, going back to our last conversation, maybe not good for business.
Well, what are we talking about? We're talking about like the parent phone calls? What are we talking about?
Well, if you're in the business of putting high marks up and chasing a competition and performance revenue enhancements.
But they're usually looking at test score data for that stuff. I don't think that they're looking at I don't think that they're looking at report cards.
Two different platforms.
But there is a reason to be concerned when you have low scores on those sort of standardized measures and high, grades. That's a sign of a disconnect, and we know now that that hurts kids.
Right. Food for thought. So your parents getting A's back home with your kids, you want to double check the work. Thank you.
Good to see you.
Do the reading. Good school hunting. Final word next. John Hazen White Jr. here tomorrow night. Taco's 100 years old, and he just went to the State of the Union. See ya.